Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child. What happened?
Silent scan.
Not me, but my great-grandma. This story is really sad but also interesting, so I thought I'd share it. She was a young Creole teenager. French Creole was her first language, and she was a quarter to half black like me, with tan skin and loose brown curls. She was born in Florida, but when things started getting worse for black people in Florida, her family relocated to Texas. For those who don't know, Creole people tend to play heavily into colorism. Although they are definitely mixed race, they prioritize light-skinned people. The looser your curl, the lighter your skin, the more white you look, the better. Her parents had high expectations for her to marry a wealthy, light-skinned man who would take care of her. Instead, she met my great-grandfather. A poor, dark-skinned man jumping from job to job working for farmers and trying to make a living. The two of them fell in love. They were just teenagers. Her parents threatened to disown her if she continued seeing him, and like a rebellious teenager, she refused. They wanted her to do better. She wanted to be in love. They might have broken up eventually if she didn't get pregnant. But she did, and that was the end of it. Her parents basically said, "You've ruined your life," and disowned her right there. The whole family disowned her. No one would speak to her aunts, uncles, cousins, not a single person stood up for her. So she had no choice. The two of them moved to California so he could get a job picking oranges. He built a house. They had their first daughter. She was 16. She never saw her family again.
Silent scan.
My parents disowned my oldest sister. She always struggled growing up more than us. She became a teen mom with a bad older dude, partied a lot, etc. But my parents helped her a lot. They do okay for themselves, but had a no co-signing rule for all 6 of my siblings, and they co-signed for her house so she could get a head start. She didn't pay the mortgage for almost 3 years before my mom got served in front of all the other nurses at her work. My parents worked tirelessly to try to work out deals where my sister and her family kept the house and got some leniency, but to no avail because my sister never showed up for court dates. During this time, she paid $12K for IVF and got pregnant with her 5th kid. When my mom demanded some of the money back, she accused my dad and my brother of beating her sons. When my parents took them to Disney World, he didn't, and said she'd file a police report if he asked for money again. They kept asking, cause it wasn't true. She awkwardly joined us for Christmas and punched my brother in the face during the meal for humiliating her oldest son by asking him if he wanted to work at my brother's company for good pay. Her oldest son is in and out of jail, and my brother was trying to help him after his release, but her son said he didn't want a job and got mad. She then called the cops and told them the same brother had illegal guns in his truck, and they came on Christmas night and searched his truck. No guns found. Needless to say, she is not welcome anywhere near any of us, and my mom still cries about it, but refuses to talk to her again.
Silent scan.
My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, aunt, took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too.
Silent scan.
My family disowned me because I disowned my mother. I was sexually groomed and abused/tortured by her husband for years, and when I finally told her, she not only didn't believe me, but stayed married to him for 7 years. I had to move out at 16 to get away from how I was being treated. Then when I finally began speaking to others, she started to cover her ass with her social circle by telling them that I seduced her husband. I cut her off for years and didn't ever want to see her again, but my family bullied me to just get over it and have a relationship with my mother, and that I was hurting her. Even my sister, who knew what happened, knew I stayed for so long to protect her, fell into a trap of my mother whining to everyone around her and painting me as a liar. About 4 years ago, she was very suddenly diagnosed with advanced cancer and didn't have much time. I was moving out of my home state and everyone told me I needed to see her before I left, that I needed to be there, but I didn't want to. In the end, everyone turned their back on me. They were so mad I wouldn't just forget my trauma just to say goodbye to someone I hadn't loved for a long time, and rightly so.
Silent scan.
A little different. I was disowned, but I deserved it. I was an addict and a mess for a long time. My mom couldn't keep bailing me out of trouble and watch me self-destruct anymore. I wasn't living at home. She came to see me one last time to tell me she was done, not to contact her. She would no longer have anything to do with me. She was in pieces. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. But it was the best thing she ever did for me. Once she cut me off, my rock bottom came hard and fast. After a little while of living on the streets and my addiction consuming me, I made my way to a detox center, got a few days clean under my belt, and never looked back. That was almost 15 years ago. After I was clean a little while, I contacted my mom, and little by little we built a relationship again, and now we are really close. I'm forever grateful to my mom for letting me fall and letting me back into her life. This has to be the most heartwarming thing I've ever read. To be able to look at things rationally and not hate your mother, but rather appreciate what she did to you while you were in a dire spot. This is something not everyone can do at all. I don't know you, but I'm glad you were able to get back into your mother's life, and I'm sure she is also happy you got up on your feet. Wish you all the best.
Silent scan.
I have disowned my oldest son. He molested my daughter, has been diagnosed as a sociopath, and we have restraining orders against him. It isn't fun, and I never thought I would be that parent. This may be weird coming from a stranger, but thank you for doing so. My partner told her mother that her older brother sexually abused her for close to 10 years and she did nothing. She never reacted to the info, kept letting brother live with her, and still expects us all to play happy family. I really respect you for what you did. I literally just got off the phone with my mom saying I never want to see my older brother again, and she started with that was so long ago, and I had to hang up on her.
Silent scan.
I disowned my father. I don't believe that it nearly as difficult a decision as disowning a child, but it was tough. I grew up in an upper middle class perfect nuclear family. My parents were high school sweethearts. My dad was an operator at an oil refinery. My mom was an accountant turned stay-at-home mom. I'm a middle child. I have a 3-year older brother and a 3-year younger brother. When my older brother was about 10, my dad's drinking got out of hand, and he became extremely physically abusive. A few years later, my mom divorced him after 23 years of marriage because she was afraid for our lives. My dad went off the deep end. Started doing drugs, stealing, etc. Was involved in a few hit and runs. My older brother, who had received the brunt of the physical abuse, was manipulated into a relationship with my dad for a few years. To a lesser extent, so was I. He seemed to take an interest in us for the first time since we were little, but in hindsight it was just more manipulation and gaslighting. Won't go into all of the details, but my brothers and I eventually got wind of just what kind of sketchy stuff he was involved in. My little brother and I, who both had aspirations to get into law enforcement, cut him out of our lives completely. My older brother took a while longer. He was a kid who always just wanted his dad to love him, and so he was wearing blinders. He did eventually see the light and cut my dad out as well. A few years ago, my dad was living with his mom. My grandma had been manipulated by him for years, and they had a symbiotic codependent relationship. She was a prescription addict, and he was an everything addict. My grandma had a reverse mortgage on her home. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and given 6 months to live and moved into a nursing home. My dad kept squatting at her house, despite the bank coming to, rightfully, claim the home. Cops got involved, and he was arrested. My grandma slipped and fell 2 days after moving to the nursing home. She developed a brain bleed and died a few days later. My dad had a seizure his first night in jail and was brought to the hospital, where it was determined he had a burst brain aneurysm. The doctors theorized that the aneurysm was the result of his drug use, and when he was scuffling with the cops during the arrest, his increased blood pressure and/or jarring caused it to burst. He's now in a nursing home and functioning at about a 6-year-old's level. He has some inkling that he's fucked up royally and it is all his fault, but he really doesn't understand the specifics. He can kind of communicate and hold conversations, but they're bizarre and wander all over, and a lot of very strange words make their way in. I visit him a few times per year. I only do it because the person he became with addiction is dead. I believe that karma caught up to him, and he's earned his hell. I truly would not shed a tear if he dropped dead tomorrow. He's been dead to me for a decade. I do have some compassion for a sad, confused 58-year-old man who is alone in a depressing nursing home with no visitors. He knows he has kids and a wife. He doesn't understand they're divorced, and sometimes he even knows he has grandkids he has never been allowed to meet. So he doesn't understand why nobody visits him. I've started occasional visits not because I have any interest in having a relationship with him, but because unfortunately the doctors saved him when his aneurysm burst, and we are left with a person who is paying for crimes he doesn't know he committed in a world he doesn't understand. He sometimes cries when he asks to see pictures of that little boy, my nephew, his grandson, and I have to explain, yet again, why he isn't allowed to meet him. He asks me questions about that cop, my little brother, whose name he can't remember. He looks so proud when I tell him that his son is rising through the ranks and just became a K9 officer. It's like a shard of the dad he was 25 years ago has surfaced, and everything in between only exists as a convoluted fever dream. It tears my heart open as a human to see his suffering, but in a really twisted, sick way gives me satisfaction that his actions caught up to him, which makes me hate myself even more than I already did. I doubt anyone has read this. It wasn't supposed to be a novel. But that's how I disowned my dad, then kind of developed a minimal relationship with the ghost of his former humanity that now occupies his body. My heart goes out to people who have had to disown a child. I was extremely fortunate to have an incredible mom and extended family to support my brothers and me, yet I'm still damaged from my time with him. Having to choose between compassion and love for a flawed person and your own or your other loved one's physical and mental well-being rips something open inside of you and leaves you permanently scarred.
Silent scan.
My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Man, years later, at my older sister's funeral that he had the fucking gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, "I thought it would be easier for everyone." He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy a second adolescence, while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him.
Silent scan.
As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the JW rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth, but refuse to follow it, including family, and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me, I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds, only to do it again a couple years later, and so on until I stopped caring and no longer attempt to be a part of their lives at all.
Silent scan.
Alright, so this is a family secret that I revealed and got my mother's family to disown me. Which honestly is for the better. When I was a kid, my uncle molested me repeatedly over a summer I was with my grandparents. It really fucked with my sexuality and took me into my late teens, early 20s and years of therapy to accept that I'm gay. Still working on trying to even trust men as whole, in part because of this. Anyway, when I was about 14 I told my mother, because I just needed to get the secret out. I was in a situation I'd have to be alone with him again, and I was scared. Although looking back I was more scared trying to tell her what her youngest brother did. When I did I learned that this is a pretty common thing in her family, and it happened to her by my grandmother's second husband. Well, it happened to her and her 3 other sisters. My mother apologized to me, telling me she was sorry for sending me away that summer, and that the family curse caught me as well. Honestly, I needed to hear this, because I hated her for letting this happen, but she had no way of stopping it, or even knowing it had happened to her son. Always been something that happened to the girls, but never the boys. Aren't family traditions grand? Sarcasm. We went to the cops, and because it had been so long, and across state lines, there wasn't much they could do. It was my word against his. My mother family acknowledged that stuff like this happens in their family, and that I should blame the devil for this happening to me, and not the person. And really I should feel bad for him, because all of this was hard on him as well. He took this time to officially come out of the closet, and they all, minus my mother, let him know how brave he is for admitting his illness. And subsequently blamed me for turning him gay. Keep in mind I was still trying to process if I was gay at this time. I was then accused of wanting to get molested, and that I needed to repent what I had done, and for trying to destroy his life. My mother tried to argue back, but at this point it was my mother's family versus my mother and I. My mother ended up giving slightly, and told them we need time to process this. They let off and we got the hell out of there, and never looked back. It's been about 10 years since I saw any of them. They blame my mother for raising a devil-loving son, which didn't get helped when I finally came out. The last thing they told us is that they'll let both my mother and I back in if and only if I admit that a 9-year-old wanted to be molested, and of course convert back to being straight. I think they are still surprised I haven't taken them up on their offer. IDK and IDC. My family is super small now, and I couldn't be more pleased.
Silent scan.